Welcome to Built to Last, the podcast where entrepreneurs share real stories about the triumphs and challenges of building enduring success. Hosted by Colby Jardine and Levi Lawrence.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this newest episode. I'm super excited. I don't know if anybody's noticed the trend for those who have listened to a lot, but we typically are picking topics that are selfishly curiosity of the moment. For Colby and I, you know, the original, the first customer was us, and we're just hoping other people follow suit. And so there's a number of topics here that you'll see common themes, and I'm looking forward to the conversation, and I won't spoil them at all. But I was thinking about this, David. One of the things you said in a speaking I heard is the reason why part of this business exists. And it was over 10 years ago. And I can't wait to kind of tie into that. I didn't realize that I was tying all the connection points. But with that foreshadowing and no explanation, I'd like to pass it off. And David, if you would just introduce yourself and kind of what your business is, just the way you would to a stranger. And let's start there, because as we always say, nobody likes to read the bio. And sometimes I learn stuff right in the first 30 seconds.
I am very comforted to hear that you have some kind of master plan for this podcast that ties it all together, because I feel today that actual plans are in short supply right now in the world. Yeah. It seems like a lot of people are just, playing things by ear. So it's good. It's good that you've sketched this out. Who am I? I'm David Barnett. I'm a lifelong business interested person who, even from in my teenage years, would get frustrated going into businesses when I saw that they weren't doing things the way I thought they could do it better, looking for ways to improve things, to make it better, cheaper, faster, etc. And so I ended up, in business school and thought I would learn how to be a business person there. Didn't really realize that's not what they actually do there. But eventually got into the world of real business. And the way that I got into the world of business was with the Yellow Pages. So I became an account rep in the late 90s, where I got to go and sit down with the owners and managers of all the businesses that you see when you're driving around, and talking with those people and finding out what kind of customers they were looking for and figure out how they made money. Eventually I went off and started my own business. And then I started another business, which was a debt brokerage company for small businesses. So I was helping people get operating and capital leases on equipment. Factoring facilities is when you sell your accounts receivable. I was helping people arrange loans from the big banks that we all would recognize. And then the financial crisis came in 08, 09, kind of put a damper on that, in that a lot of these new sort of B-tier lenders that had grown over the early 2000s all went bust all at once. And I was helping a lot of people get loans from those people. And so then I ended up in business brokerage, because I had met people during that finance brokerage time who were looking for money to buy existing businesses. And I realized just that the market was pretty underserved. And so I signed up with a big international franchise brand in the business brokerage community. I got a certification from a big international association and went to work. I sold 36 companies in 3.5 years for people based out of my office in Moncton. Business brokerage is an absolutely terrible business that I don't ever recommend anyone get into, because it's based upon this real estate model where you meet someone who has a business and they want to sell it. And so you sign them up, and then you do all this work and you find a buyer. And at the end of the day, if the business is sold, you get a commission. And what I didn't fully appreciate when I got into it is that it can sometimes take a year or two of conversations to get someone to actually sign up with you. And then they say, great, let's sell the business. And I'm like, good, I need all of this stuff. And it can sometimes take people 6 or 8 months to get me the documents. And then you have to put it together and make sort of a marketing package, and you have to advertise, and it can take a year to find the right buyer. And then you work out a deal between the buyer and seller, which can take weeks. And then you have to work with the buyer to help them build a business plan, to help them apply for financing. And so all that debt brokerage stuff I used to do before came in again. And then finally you have a deal that goes to closing. So it was, if you looked at the financial statements from my business brokerage over those 3.5 years, what you would have found is that sales and earnings went up 30 or 40% a year. And you would say, wow, this is a really awesome business that's growing like crazy. But what it would not have told you, if you looked at those year-end financials, is that each of those years had a period of 7 to 9 months long with no closings at all. And so like every month I was paying for office rent. I had a receptionist that I was paying. I had a billboard campaign in Moncton at the time. I was doing Rogers Radio back when talk radio was around. And so it was costing me between my life and my office and everything like 10, 12,000 a month just to keep the lights on. And you go 7, 8 months with no closings. And you know what ends up happening is you end up in debt. And so I had lines of credit and credit cards, and I would sell a business for like $1 million and get a 6-figure commission check. And all it would do is fill in holes. And I'd be, back to even. And so it was incredibly stressful. I jokingly point to the gray on the side of my head and I say, all of this gray hair came in during those 3 years. And since I left business brokerage, I haven't had any new gray hair. So it's I left and I became a banker. And so it was totally different. I still remember the guilt that I felt the first time I got paid. Like money ended up in my bank account and I thought, oh my God, I didn't actually have to slay any dragons or argue with a lawyer or like get this jump over an amazing hurdle to help this deal come together at the last minute to get this money. Like literally they just sent it to me because it's been 2 weeks. But maybe it was very it was very, very, very disturbing at first. And to step back over to the other side of the fence, as it were, to be an employee for a while. But over those 3 years, when I was with the bank, I was doing revolving credit programs for mid-sized companies. So it was a completely different crew of people I was meeting. I was meeting sort of bigger companies like a dairy or something like that, like these bigger outfits. And but my phone kept ringing because people had met me in my brokerage career or they'd been given my name by someone. And I started to talk to people who wanted help doing these deals. And I would just tell them, like, I don't do this anymore. I'm not a broker. And eventually, a guy named Bob, who wanted to buy a business that I had met earlier in my brokerage days, he said, Dave, I found this deal on my own. I want some help with it. I've been talking to my lawyer. I've been talking to my accountant. Both of them are telling me what I need to get out of the deal, but neither seems to be able or willing to help me negotiate through this deal, like how to talk to this other party and all this kind of stuff. And I said, Bob, I can help you, but I've got a full-time job at the bank. So I don't know. I have to like charge you like a consultant might. And he said, great. Where do you live? I'll come to your house on Saturday. And that was like the beginning of a little side hustle. And then the bank chose to reorganize and they were offering a package. So I took the package and I used that money to be my runway to get a consulting business going, which I run still today. So this was back in 2016. And I built a couple websites. I had already written one book at that point, but I wrote 2 more books really quickly in that period.
Pre-chat GPT.
Pre-chat, yes, I actually wrote them. And I started a YouTube channel. And my idea was that I was going to help people buy and sell businesses, but I was not going to be a broker. I was going to follow a consulting model where I was just going to work with people who were doing this stuff and they would pay me for the work I was doing, which was a revolutionary concept in my mind because the whole way I had been helping people before was based on this sort of real estate model. And I describe it as pivoting from the real estate model to the like lawyer and accountant business model where, go to the lawyer, they make some contract for you or whatever, and they expect to be paid, right? And so that's what I do. And over the last 10 years, what started off as, sort of a business where I worked primarily in the region here, it's funny. People would, when I would have a conversation with someone about how I could help them, everyone wanted to meet for coffee or have a phone call to talk about my background. And I would share the same things over and over again. And I got this idea, hey, I could make videos that answer common questions. I can make one video for each question. And this could be a way of automating my sales process. And so I started making these YouTube videos. And people would say, I want to meet you for coffee next week because I want to do this. And I would say, oh, that's great. Let's make this coffee date. And then I would send them an email saying, before we meet, you should watch these 6 videos I recorded. They're only 5 or 6 minutes each, but it'll help set the stage for our conversation. And 3/4 of the time, people would email me back after the weekend and say, you know what, we don't really need to meet for coffee. I'd like to move forward. What does it look like? Like, what are your rates? And I began to realize, hey, like I'm saving a lot of time by having these videos. And I thought it was really great. What I did not really understand when I started is that anybody in the world could see them. And so then I would start to get emails from like Texas and California and Alberta.
Mm.
And at first I was like, well, how am I going to work with somebody who's in Texas? And then I realized like, I'm not even going to visit people now anymore here in Moncton. Like I'm just doing it all over the internet anyway. So I started to work with Americans and people in other countries in Western Canada and Toronto and stuff. And today, the business has 5 people on the team, and 75% of our revenue comes from American clients. And the balance of that is spread across what we call the Anglosphere, so basically the English-speaking
Mm.
countries of the world. And yeah, we work with people all over, and doing the same kind of stuff I did as a business broker, but under this consulting model. And I just had my 9th book come out in the fall.
Mm.
So we consider Amazon to be a top of funnel activity because there are people who, when they want to know something or understand something, they go looking for a book. And it's it's a great way for publicity. When a book comes out, it gives you an excuse to reach out to podcasters like, hey, I want to come on your podcast, talk about my new book. Do you want a copy? Kind of thing. So
Mm-hmm.
it helps with PR and marketing and things like that. And the YouTube channel now has like 700 videos on it. And I try to make one solo cast video a week, which is just me answering someone's question. So the same stuff I did when I started, answering one question per video. And then I'm trying to have an interview at every week. I'm trying to, but some months we've had some
Mm.
slip ups because we're trying to do them as live streams because the
Mm.
algorithms like live streams best. And we are doing some pre-recorded ones for days where maybe I'm traveling or something and I can't quite do it on that time slot. We can do them as
Mm.
premieres, which YouTube still kind of likes. So
Mm.
that's that's where I'm at, and I go to conferences and stuff, and speak to small
Yeah.
business owners and groups of entrepreneurs. That's where you and I first met,
Mm.
Levi.
That's a very comprehensive answer. I love it. Sometimes we get like 8 to 10 words, and then I'm just pulling the next thing. So that was great.
Yeah, there was a
Awesome.
lot. Like we went out for supper there, I don't know, a few months ago now, and you know, that's just opened up a whole slew of new questions that I have for you.
I love that in the show notes we're gonna have to explain the history of Yellow Pages because I
Well-
got to assume that some people like it's just not even the same thing now, right? Like there's no pages that are yellow anymore, but it's still a thing.
But funny enough, that's actually where kind of I do want to go back to that comment about the yellow pages and where you kind of got your start. I had a kind of a specific question around that. You mentioned that you'd get to go into businesses and all these things that were popping up that were driving you nuts about
Yeah.
the way they were operating, or what were some of those things that were blatantly obvious to you at a young age that wasn't working for businesses?
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, there's a drive-in in Shediac, right? I mean, at one point there was this old guy that owned it. At one point there was this old guy that owned it who was so concerned about waste that if you walked up to the counter and ordered an order of fries, he would measure out an order of frozen French fries and put it in the fryer and prepare it while 20 other people were standing behind you also wanting French fries.
Right.
And he would prepare them one scoop at a time. And I was just like, why doesn't this guy throw the whole bag into the thing? Like he'll sell all the French fries. But it's just this penny wise, pound foolish kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because at that drive-in in Shediac, they at one point in the past had the little speakers on the poles, and the poles are still there, even though they use FM radio now. And so when during the same time, and this was back in the 90s when I had these thoughts about the drive-in, I was like, why doesn't he put numbers on these poles so that people can just run in quickly, place an order with the pole number, and then they could deliver to the pole, right? So you don't have to wait in there and wait in line.
Yeah.
And today I would be like, why don't they have an app with
Yeah.
with numbers? Like actually today they wouldn't even need an app. All they would have to do is put a unique QR on every one of those poles, and people could call up the menu on their cell phone, place an order, and the kitchen would know where they are. And I saw that for the first time a couple of years ago. I was in New Orleans, and I was at this restaurant, and it was this beautiful place that was in this old industrial building, and it basically sprawled for thousands of square feet in different directions. And there were little nooks and cubbies where there were tables and chairs, and each one just had a QR code, and you would scan it, place your order, pay with your credit card, and someone would show up with the food. And I thought, that's really cool. And then, of course, these are all innovations that came from like the COVID time, right? When they were trying to, manage contact between people and all that sort of thing.
Yeah. When and this actually gets to the I can't remember when we first met. It's been through different spheres. I'm sure it was when I had my first business before I was doing the switch to professional services. But you told a story of one of your first businesses. I don't know if it's the first one or the second one, where you were the first person who introduced to me, I believe, around the built to sell, I need to systemize it so that I can pass it off. That was you, I believe, who told that story.
So it was my first business on my own out of Yellow Pages. I had a partner, and it was called Junkaway.
Yeah.
And so the way that it started is we came across the 1-800-GOT-JUNK franchise, and we reached out to those people, and they sent a package, and we got a bunch of information, and we went on sort of a conference call thing where we had to learn about stuff. And it was going to be like $100,000 to start up, and you had to buy a new truck, and you had to do all this stuff. And they actually rejected us because they told us that Moncton was too small a market for their concept. So I read the book E-Myth Revisited, and it basically described how you create a business by making it like a franchise. So I sat down and I said, well, what would the 1-800-GOT-JUNK operating manual look like? And I started writing. And I created flowcharts with how to make decisions, and I created a job sheet where we would be able to enter the information for the customer, the details of the job, all this kind of stuff. And I just wrote it all out, and it was largely wrong. But once we actually got a truck, which we bought for $8,000, and we had a machine shop in Riverview do some work to it, make the swinging gates on the back, rig it up so that we could put a tarp over it and stuff. And then we painted it with Tremclad and got a sign shop in Dieppe to put lettering on it. We were all in for like 10 grand, not 100. And then we went out and we started to respond to calls, and we went to people's homes, and we realized, hey, our pricing's all out of whack. People won't pay this. Here's what they will pay. And so then we made those changes to our operating manual and our worksheet. And then we figured out that some of the ways I had thought things would go down are not really true, that we had to modify it. But having it all written out, even though it wasn't correct, was a really great exercise, because once you've got it done, you can just go fix it really easily. And it was really great. Like, we were able to then figure out what numbers we had to keep track of, the famous KPIs and all that sort of thing. And when we decided that we didn't want to do it anymore, we impressed a lot of people when we showed them everything we had built for this small business. And we ended up selling that business. And the person who bought it told me after the deal was done that the reason they bought it was because they were so impressed with how we had systematized it, and they envisioned expanding our systems to their existing business so they could sort of copy it. And to me, I just thought, well, I just did what was in the book. And to me, it was no big deal. But then I realized later, it's funny, at that point in my life, I believed that people all existed along a spectrum of IQ, that there were smarter people and less smart people. But I didn't understand things like, the Myers-Briggs personality methodology and stuff, where there's actually different spectrums of different qualities. And, people have all sorts of different things going on. So I honestly couldn't understand why other people who I knew were smart couldn't figure out how to do this. But at the end of the day, it's just the function of my particular personality that I find that kind of stuff really easy.
So I heard that, and it resonated, and I went back and I had a food company, I had manufacturing, I was growing, but I also dealt with 150 small scale businesses that I depended on them growing with me for me to grow what I was doing. And we had an incubation kitchen, and we started doing all right, I started bringing that message, not formally, to a lot of people, and then that business closed. And then, so 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, a consulting agency to help people become more turnkey and address the systems and processes of their business was, all of our staff read E-Myth and Built to Sell to start, just to get them kind of empathy with the owner more than even just the principles. And then we merged companies with Ironhouse Pro, and we brought that side of the business over. And now I'm 99% of my time is under... And I didn't realize quite the direct connection, but I'm pretty sure that's one of the drivers, which I thought was interesting coming in, because even when we had a pre-call earlier, I hadn't quite made that connection. But that would have been a long time ago. I can't remember when, but it would have been before 2015.
Yeah. Yeah, it would have. And I'd love to take credit for, shaping your world as it exists today. But
You go ahead.
but the reality is that none of these ideas that I'm sharing are anything new, right? Like all this stuff is out there, and it's either in the public domain or you can buy a copy for $15, right? And so
it's the timing, though. The timing of hearing at the right moment is a big
yes.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of business people out there, or people that are interested in business, who maybe aren't ready to hear a certain message, and so every time they're confronted with it, it just passes through them, But you had lived enough experiences to realize, hey, this is tough, or this isn't working, this is frustrating, and then I said that thing in front of you, and you're like, oh,
that I probably heard.
This is the thing,
but...
yeah. Well, yeah, and you probably had heard it before, but it's all about the right time.
Yeah, we get that all the time.
It's funny that I was pretty I guess late. I don't know. I was later to the game of this, the correct functions of a business and how you should be thinking about it, and this built to sell model and all that stuff. And because I started a business young and just essentially worked off whatever natural talent I had, and then that quickly became not enough. And I didn't understand. And it's funny, it is same as anything. Like if your compass is just slightly off, you feel like you're going in the right direction, but then you end up super far away. It's like that stuff just can zoom by you and right in front of your face, and until something like your experience.
You probably went further than most, because one of your strengths is communicating and talking to people and building relationships. So that covers a lot of other gaps.
But I'll add that, and I think I may have said this, maybe not on the podcast, but what happened is that I was able to get in the right rooms and get things farther than maybe most, but then the execution to follow it and the systems to follow it and to keep multiple things going at the same time just crumbled. just crumbled. And then then you just think that you're really bad at, you just accept that. And I think, you think of the old school owners that have just trudged through and figured out a way that they do things. And then, and now we're having to have conversations with that owner as the big transition is happening with all the businesses, having to make some sort of transition, whether it's sell or whatever. And there's a lot of that emotional attachment to the way that they built things.
Well, and sometimes I don't think there's enough credit given for luck, because I know a bunch of business owners right now that are in their 70s who've never had these epiphanies at all. They've just been lucky enough to hire the right assistant or person that they are able to delegate / abdicate things to, and that person is incredibly talented and manages to pull it off or implement systems of their own. And so this business owner now believes that business is easy. You just need to hire the right people. And then if they lose that person and they hire the next person, they can't understand why the next person maybe can't do what the other person did. Yeah. And they really have no idea of what the other person had orchestrated, sort of behind the curtain kind of thing. I see that a lot.
And I think there's I would say, and I'd love to hear both of your opinions on this, that I don't think that people realize that that's what they're buying with a franchise a lot of the time.
Some franchises.
Some franchises. Like to buy, quote unquote, a business in a box, like a McDonald's or something along those lines that has fantastic training, all the tech, all that kind of stuff. I'm curious at how many people really understand the difference between starting something from scratch, making all those processes up, and then when you purchase a McDonald's, you get that stuff. I wonder if the majority I wonder how many people realize that from the beginning.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned franchises, because one of my books that came out in 2014 was called Franchise Warnings. And one of the things that I put in there, because when I was a broker, I resold a couple of franchises, and one of the lessons that I learned is what you just said about franchises having all the systems and processes and everything put together. Is that's what they like to tell you, but there are franchises out there that are really poor at it.
Yes.
And they actually don't have it all put together. And I've known franchisees who bought franchises, did not get anything that they expected in the way of operating aids, materials, systems, etc.,
Yeah.
and have had to like pull other franchisees to try to figure out how they were doing things.
Yeah.
And the other franchisees turned out to be a better resource than the actual franchisor. It's one of the things that I warn people about is like, don't claim to have these systems, go see them.
Yeah.
And I tell the story of one guy I know out of Halifax who went to Toronto to a head office, and he was like, well, where's your operations manual? And they showed him a book, and they said, we can't let you see it until you sign on and everything. And it turned out that the book was like a workplace health and safety thing that was put together by a consultant that was all about like handling chemicals and stuff. But it wasn't an operations manual at all. Like it didn't have what you would expect to find in that McDonald's operating manual, which I've never seen, but apparently covers everything, like from how to make the burgers to how to sponsor the local baseball team, right?
Right.
And once you've seen the good and the bad, it's fascinating. I ask some really great questions for people who are buying into or have a franchise. Like, what kind of franchise is it? I worked for, in my first trade, I was a chef, and I worked overseas in Belgium for an Irish hotel chain that was in a bunch of places, because Irish hotels and bars are pretty much all over the world. And I walked in, and there was a 3-inch binder and tests I had to take for the pouring of Guinness, and a second one for Stella. And it was just like I was like, and then I come back and I work and stuff here, and I was like, I'm lucky if I got like shown where the bar was. But if you're going to scale the way an Irish pub does to take over the world, you need to kind of have, because it looks super casual, but there's a lot under the hood.
Yeah.
Well, and over in Ireland and the UK, a lot of those sort of local quaint neighborhood pubs are actually owned by big companies, right?
They are now,
So
for sure.
They've got to have it systematized, instead of just sort of having the owner and their family kind of watching over everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of the book I've been reading? Or it's the third or fourth time I've read it, but Unreasonable Hospitality?
No.
So it takes this a little bit further, and it comes from like the hospitality customer service side, and it's written by somebody who's a very successful New York restaurateur, but the entire book is extending the principles of unreasonable hospitality to any sector. And the idea is that like when you truly invest in like those small moments of delight to be able to take advantage of luck and have the buy-in of your team, but you can be so over the top process driven so that these little micro moments happen that everybody thinks are by chance. And it's really great.
I read a book along a similar concept from a guy who used to work at Disney. And they're in this category too, where they kind of institutionalize the unexpected little moment,
the surprise and delight
creates
done in
memories,
a process,
right?
Yeah.
And it's one of the big hotel chains too, and one of these big international brands that has a policy about people having a certain spending authority. The Ritz-Carlton
always did, because I worked for them for a while, and even as a reservations agency, I was able to make those calls.
So and there's a famous story about a little girl who lost her stuffed animal or something at a New York City hotel.
No, I don't know.
And the staff found it, but they didn't just send it back. Someone went out and bought at the time a disposable camera, and they went around the hotel, like to the kitchen and the dining room, and they went and toured all the different places in the hotel and took photos and had them developed, and then sent the animal back to the child with these photos saying, the reason you missed, your teddy or whatever was because he was out touring the hotel when you guys left.
How incredible is that?
And so, like, are those people ever going to go anywhere else when they visit the city? Like, never, right? That's the place they're going forever.
No,
and
I
all
love
the
that
friends.
stuff.
Yeah,
I love that you can build it that doesn't rest on a couple heroic or well-built, charismatic people.
Yeah, that Levi. I mean, you know this. I'm not sure if I mentioned this to you before, David, when we first got together. But my parents ran a Burger King for 22 years here in Miramichi.
Okay.
And they turned that restaurant into a family restaurant. And they hung my grandmother's paintings and kind of went against the grain on a lot of things. And the owners were there 7 days a week for 22 years. And they ended up making like the top 5% of Burger Kings in the world. And and people went there for supper, people went there for breakfast, and like families would go after church, and like it was a thing.
Mm.
And it was just fascinating looking back now. It was normal when I was a kid, and then now I'm looking at it like, wow, this is very odd what they did.
Yeah, I would buy a Burger King so that I didn't need to be there.
Yeah, but they just, that was the way my grandfather and parents wanted to be. They just wanted that excellence. Everything
Yeah.
they did, they wanted to do it well. Yeah.
I think we all we've said it a few times on different chats, and I know I've told you, David, but we're actively looking for acquisitions. We're trying.
Well, I've been listening to your show, and I've been hearing you talk about it, and some of the other things that some of the other guests have said too. So it's interesting for me to listen to. I'm happy to see if I can help you here during the call.
Well, it's been exciting. We've made the decision. We're not rushing into it. We're busy, but then like we've have criteria. We know what we're looking for, not looking for. We have gone down a due diligence path that isn't going to happen, and we've learned from that, and that was exciting. I actually wrote, I don't know, again, I think I got this from you, and there's probably a story behind it, but the be careful we don't buy ourselves a job, which made me think, Colby, when you said, it's like some businesses, like you buy them, but you have to operate them. That is one of the criteria. We're not looking to buy jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was you, I think.
Well, it depends who the buyer is, right? And it
Yeah.
depends what the buyer wants. It's funny. I was actually writing something today about the market for jobs and how it's different than the market for businesses.
Yeah.
Because there is a market for jobs. There are people, that guy, that tradesperson who's from the Maritimes and went out to Alberta, and now he wants to come back, but wants to buy something that he's going to operate himself. Like he's going to buy one of those businesses that you describe as a job, and that's exactly what he wants, right? Now, is he going to pay a lot of money for that? No, because it's not worth a lot. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be a lower ticket transaction. The seller is, if their expectations are not set correctly, or may miss the opportunity to sell that thing. I'm sure we'll get in this today, but a lot of small businesses don't sell because the sellers have completely unrealistic expectations of what their business might be worth. And there's a definite shortage of good advice out there for people that have small businesses that might want to sell them. And that's part of what I do in my business, is help people out.
So you just mentioned something earlier about how the brokerage world for businesses feels like the real estate world. And I know that in the real estate world, specifically right now, is like after COVID, they're saying, well, your house is, you put it up for $750,000 and it's in reality worth $350,000. Like that must be, I'm assuming that similar kind of conversation happens because the broker's trying to get the most out of the deal as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, so here are the problems. Is that
Plural.
you have you've got this idea that you want to have the broker and the seller's interests aligned, and the seller's interest is presumed to be to sell the business for the highest price. And so this is where the notion that a commission-based system is what is effective, right? But what that then does is it creates an incentive for brokers to try to put the highest possible price on a business. And everyone might be like, yeah, that makes sense. But businesses are always transacted at a price that makes sense as a function of their cash flow. And there are a lot of really educated buyers out there. There's people that watch my YouTube channel, or there's people that learn how to do the math, right? And so here's the problem: if you put a business up for sale that's at an unrealistically high asking price, is that the people who are knowledgeable buyers that have down payment money, good credit scores, industry experience, and are familiar with the process and have been educating themselves on how to buy a business, they'll see that overpriced business and they'll say that person's crazy, and they won't engage, right? And the problem for that seller, because they think it's like selling a house where I can put it up for a high price, and then if people offer me less, I'll just pull my price down over time. They won't meet the qualified buyer, but who they will meet is other people who also don't know what they're doing. And so they'll meet that buyer who doesn't know what they're doing. The buyer will meet with them, look at the business, get excited, ask for a bunch of information, then they'll make an offer, and it might even be a full price offer. Now the seller thinks that they're, really smart business person because they got someone to agree to the price they wanted. Then the buyer goes to the banker, and the banker shows them how it doesn't cash flow, and they won't do the loan. But by this point, 4 months have gone by,
Yeah.
right? And the seller now thinks that it's realistic to sell the business because they convinced one person to offer that. Now they think there's a problem with the bank, or the borrower didn't have a good enough credit or something. And then they keep going, trying to find someone to pay this, outsized price, and they just waste time. And one of the ultimate truths about selling a small business is that the perception of the risks involved in the deal from the buyer's point of view is always going to be very different from the seller, who knows the risks and has lived with them for a long time and knows how to manage them. The seller also usually has a much stronger balance sheet, because if it's a good, profitable, cash flowing business, they've paid down their debts over time. They've accumulated other assets. If there's some kind of hiccup in the market, they can even maybe put money back in if they have to help the business. The buyer, though, is going to buy the business. They're going to apply maximum leverage to it. So they're going to end up with a very weak balance sheet the moment they do the deal. And now everything has to work out just perfectly. And sellers often don't get this. The biggest threat to sellers trying to sell a business is that they have a lack of empathy. And when I talk with business owners, I will ask them questions about their customers. I will say, how many of you spend time thinking about your customers, what your customers want, what your customers can afford, how your customers are going to buy your product? And everyone's hand goes up. Like, to be successful in business, you have to consider your customer. But for some reason, when people think about selling their business, they become entirely self-centered. They say, oh, I want $1 million because I want a condo in Florida, and I want an RV at Grand Lake, and I want this, and I want this, and I want this. And they never once actually sit down and think, if I was a buyer, how would I buy my business? What kind of money would I have to put down? How much would I have to borrow? What would the payment be? And then look at your own business and say, would I be able to afford that? Like, it's incredible that they don't do this, right? And so this is an exercise that I often take sellers through. And I actually had lunch with a guy the other day who I've known for years, and he said, I'm thinking about selling my business, and I want to get an idea of what it's worth. And I said, why don't we go have lunch and bring your financial statement? So I looked at his income statement. We did some quick math to determine what we call seller's discretionary earnings, which is kind of a level of cash flow we use when we look at businesses that are sold. And then I said, what do you want for your business? And he told me. And I said, okay. I said, if someone paid you that amount and they had to borrow 3/4 of it, what do you think the payment would be? So I whipped out my phone and we looked up an online loan calculator, and we put it over 7 years, which is like pretty much what you can get for a business acquisition loan for amortization. And I said, if you went out today and borrowed that amount of money, this is what the payment would be. Could you make this payment today in your business? And he was like, no, that'd strangle me. I'm like, yeah, I know. So why would somebody volunteer for this? Do you think someone's going to volunteer to do that? And so people are buying a business because they want to avoid the risk of starting something from scratch, because they know that it's hard to start a business. You got to find enough customers, all that kind of stuff, right? So if you buy a business, you're going to get those customers. But if you overpay for a business, you get another different kind of risk, which is financing risk, where all of a sudden now the business has to function perfectly. Or even worse, it's got to grow in order for you to afford the payments. So not having enough customers is the risk of a startup. If you over leverage and you pay too much for a business, you now have the risk of, if you lose a customer, you can't make the payment. It's exactly the same risk. It's just the inverse side of it. But what's worse is when you start a business, you're usually putting in some capital, maybe you borrow against your credit cards or something, and that's what you've risked. And if your business fails, you lose that. But if you buy a business and you borrow hundreds of thousands of dollars from the bank, well, now your personal liability and risk in the deal is just magnified several fold for most people. So it's actually a riskier position. And so for somebody to actually do the deal, not only do they have to be comfortable that the business will cash flow, they'll be able to service their debt, but there has to be something in it for them for taking the risk. So that buyer who's going to buy the business, and a lot of the times a buyer will be someone who will take over the day-to-day operations that the seller's doing. And so that person who's going to do that, they have to be able to take home a salary for their time, commensurate with what the market wage is for that job. So if you're going to take over the corner sandwich shop, the buyer's going to have a lower expectation of salary than if you're taking over an engineering firm, right? You take over an engineering firm, you probably deserve $150,000 or $200,000 salary, right? You take over the sandwich shop, you're probably in line for a $35,000 or $40,000 salary. But then beyond the salary, they have to service the debt, they have to pay the taxes, they have to take care of capex because we add back depreciation and amortization when we calculate this. So we have to have an allowance for machinery to be replaced. And then there's got to be some kind of return on the cash you put into the deal. So when you start to look at all those mouths that have to be fed out of the cash flow of the business, you realize, hey, it's not going to make sense for someone to do this. And so one of the things that I try to do when I'm working with sellers is I try to show them the deal from the buyer's point of view. If they are willing to accept that, then they either say one of two things. They either say, well, if I just kept the business, I'd have the same money over the next couple of years, which is true. Or they'll say, if that's all I can get, I don't want to sell it, which is also, true. And it brings me back to the reality that businesses are always worth far more to their sellers and owners than they are to the buyers. And then people will then say, but hey, wait a minute, how do I then cash out? Where's the big opportunity? I've always been told my whole life that if I build this great business, I'm going to be able to sell it and exit and get all this money. And the problem is that people have been listening to content that is not for them. And when you get into the world of the internet and you're listening to conversations about buying and selling businesses, there are conversations about Main Street businesses, which is where I live. And Main Street means cash flows under $500,000 a year, which is like 99% of businesses are in the Main Street category. And then there's the middle market, and then there's the big ones, right? And then there's the weird conversations that come out of Silicon Valley about internet stuff. And none of those other conversations apply to Main Street businesses, right? And so people will listen to this content about so-and-so who sold their business for 7 times cash flow or whatever. And I say to these people, like, that clearly does not in any way apply to you. Like, the only people who can afford to do that deal are people that are like private equity backed with a super low cost of capital because they've collected, investment funds from a bunch of wealthy people, and they're looking for, this deal that they're going to roll up with other companies. Like, that's not you.
Yeah.
That's not your business. And so a lot of people will, when they learn the truth, will say, well, I can't afford to sell my business for that because I need more money, right, to retire, or I need this or I need that. So who then ends up being the sellers? There has to be a pressing personal concern on the part of the seller. And there's basically 5 categories. There's what I call the mental basket, which is burnout, boredom, and fatigue. So these are people who are just tired of it. They don't want anything to do with it. And when their cell phone rings, I always joke with these people. When they say, I'm just getting tired of it, I'll say, when your cell phone rings, who are you most afraid that it might be? Employees or customers? And when they chuckle uncomfortably, I know that they really do suffer from this set of circumstances.
I'm putting myself into 2016 at the end of a business. It's like I had that moment.
Yeah, right? Your stomach tightens up and you're like, oh, who do I have to talk to? So burnout, boredom, and fatigue. And then there's the other ones that are probably ones you could guess. Divorce, poor health, the need to relocate, and retirement. So divorce and poor health, you get it, right? You have the terrible personal circumstance. You've got to get out of your business. The need to relocate is becoming a bigger and bigger item, especially when we have more and more women who are owning businesses. Because what will happen is you get this married couple and one of them will own a business. The other will be a very successful employed person with a career that may be more lucrative than the business. And that career person part of the couple will get transferred to Calgary or Vancouver or something. And the other spouse owns a business. Well, it's going up for sale, right? Because they want to stay together. And so I've unfortunately worked with some people where they've had to split their family for a year as they work through trying to dispose of the business, and while the other person has to go report to work in the other city. And then retirement's the last one. And so of those list of 5 items, only one of them is a planned thing, retirement. The other 4 things happen to us.
It should be a planned thing.
Well, it should be a planned thing. The other danger, though, I'll tell you, Levi, is that, and I'm increasingly having these conversations with people in the financial planning community, because there's a huge, huge blind spot amongst financial planners. And I'm having more and more conversations about this with people where they'll sit down with someone who's 30 and they'll make a retirement plan. And the person will be a business owner, and they'll say, oh, what are you going to sell your business for at 65 in 35 years' time, right? And the person will say, oh, I don't know, it's going to be worth like $1 million. And they'll put it in the plan. And then at 55, they're like not even checking to validate whether it's a sellable business or it could be sold or what have you. And so that's a conversation I'm having more and more with people. And so people will get caught off guard. They won't be able to afford to retire, or they'll need a certain amount from the sale. And when they realize they can't get it, they can't retire. So they end up working longer.
So I feel like we just got tough love, lots of clear facts, which is great. And I'd love to like double down and like give you the knife. Let's cut down our assumptions even further. So all that I think we knew is true. I love the categories. I hadn't quite thought it through that way. We have an assumption that I'd love you to tell us if we're absolutely foolish or not.
Okay.
And we talked to a lot of people, so somebody's in this category, but you have a broader perspective on this. Our assumption is everything else you said holds true, but there is going to be, and a lot of people call it the gray tsunami, but it's not limited to gray hair or age. But I think it's somewhere between the mental basket and retirement or aging out, looking for succession, that there's going to be a large pool of businesses that want to sell, that we could purchase, that we're doing more than solving a financial problem. I think that's our sweet spot, is that we're really well set up to buy a business that's not really ready for sale. And price is one thing. And I think we want to make sure it's fair, because a win-win would really help everything in the transition. But more so, it would have to be very flexible terms for fair price. Mm-hmm. And so we're looking for like the people looking to sell for legacy, or the people that we're going to cause that business and the employees and the vendors and the customers to still have an independent business to go to. Like that should be in our value for us to be a winning purchaser, because it won't be strictly on dollars. Like we're just not approaching it that way. And I'll get Colby, but I'm looking for like are we out to lunch? Because we talk to people and they say it, but then I go to the brokers and I think the stuff on the marketplace, none of that exists. And a lot of people say it is, but like we're not seeing it. So now we're finding other ways to go to that gray market.
And just a note to make sure that this is said out loud, we don't want to buy a distressed business.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you want to buy one that makes money.
Yeah. Yes. And that like everything that they're quote unquote.
But we can build the operations manual. That's what we're set up to do.
Yeah. Like everything that like, because we are having these conversations more, and even if it's not a business for sale, but we're always working with different businesses. We kind of have this in the back of our head of like how we might approach this, or it's like the things that we're specifically good at is very helpful in the majority of conversations that we're having with the systems and the HR and all that kind of
change stuff. And culture and all that stuff. Yeah.
Okay. So do you guys have money available to make a down payment if you find the right business?
So we have some capital available, and depending on the type of business, we've started discussing what financial partnership look like, because we have a lot of our network who, they don't want to be operational, but they'd love to participate in this type of thing. Okay. So we're not without ability, but we're not sitting on a large chest. It wouldn't be a cash deal for sure.
So let me give you sort of the landscape of what is happening in this market, and then I can better answer your question about what you want to do and if it's feasible or not. So right now there are almost 20 different online gurus who are currently offering $10,000 courses on how to buy a business with no money. And they, this is right out of the playbook of the Learn How to Buy Real Estate with No Money in 1988 at the Toronto Airport Hilton Hotel conference room, right? And so there are every weekend more graduates of these programs who've been taught tactics and tricks on how to convince someone to sell a business on 100% seller financing or with some other kind of trick. I'm going to take over your business and somehow refinance all the stuff to give you a down payment, even though I don't own it yet. And like all kinds of crazy stuff, right? And so when a broker puts a business up for sale that has a decent cash flow, they will get inundated with these people who are all saying the same things. Like, I'm looking for a creative deal. It's got to be a motivated seller who has an interest in legacy, blah, 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 blah. And so they're the words you said a minute ago.
So we sound like one of those dicks. Write that down.
There's a lot of people saying that same kind of stuff, right? And so are those things possible? Is it possible to buy a good cash flowing business with very little money using things like getting the seller to finance a big chunk of it, or getting the seller to agree to let you work on the business beforehand. It is possible. But here are the challenges, and I'll give you some case studies from some of my clients. So I've got a client in California who's in a service industry. They do translating services, and they have a lot of government work that they do in hospitals and things like that. And he has bought now 4 different businesses. The first one that he bought was his parents' business, and so it was sold on good terms, right? As you might expect. He bought it with a sibling, and then they went out and tried to buy another business, and they did it using a bank loan, an SBA loan, because they're in the United States. So they were able to get a good amount of financing for that second acquisition. A couple years later, they went and did their third acquisition. But by this point, they've got now a track record of operating these 2 companies together. And so when they went to the third operator who wanted to sell, they said, you know what, we could borrow money for this, or you could lend us the money and we'll give you a higher rate of interest than you'd be able to get if you took the money and invested it. And here are the financial statements from our first 2 companies that are very much like yours, and you can see that we're capable operators.
Mm-hmm.
And that third person was willing to do that deal. So they put like 20% down, the seller carried a note for the balance, right? And then they went and did the fourth deal, and it was similar to this. They had to put more down, but the seller was willing to finance the difference because they've got this track record, right? They're not newbies, they're not strangers.
Yeah.
They actually have a demonstrable track record. It's very difficult. It would be extremely difficult for me, who's never run any business related to translation, to go and make that same kind of convincing argument to one of those business owners, right? Because I don't have the track record. So you guys, as operators in the business services, business guidance, organizing kind of space, if you found a similar business to yours, you'd probably have a really strong opportunity to make that kind of deal, because you could show them that you are capable of doing this kind of business already because you're executing, right? And so so that's one aspect of this. The other thing is that you mentioned a good, profitable business. There are always lots of buyers for good, profitable businesses. So even though your offer, even though you might see an asking price of $500,000, you might think, hey, we want to do all this stuff like to get the seller to help us buy this business. We're going to offer $525,000. We're going to offer more than asking to get that person's attention. But there are probably other people with greater resources that are making much less demanding offers on that business because it's attracting all kinds of buyers. So you're competing against other buyers, and that's the job of a business broker. The job of a business broker is to create a competitive environment so that the seller gets the best possible opportunity that they can get. And that's literally the conversation I used to have when I was a business broker, is I would say, yes, my commission's a lot of money, but I'm going to bring multiple buyers that will compete against each other, and you'll get more for your business, and that's going to be how I earn my commission, right? And so when you're going down the road of using the broker channel to try to find one of these businesses, you just have to be aware that the businesses are likely to be better prepared, because if it's a good qualified broker, they've done some work with their client to get everything ready, right? So you should have better information available and all that kind of stuff. The broker has probably given them an idea of what their business can sell for. And then this is really where it's important. So if it's a qualified broker that had one of those tough love conversations with them, then they're going to be ready and prepared to accept a reasonable offer because they know what it's really worth. If it's a less than qualified broker,
yeah, I was going to say, that's a
then the person's expectations are going to be all out of whack. And I'll give you an example. So one of the ways that we commonly value small businesses is that we look at this seller's discretionary earnings cash flow that I talked about earlier, and we find out what other people have paid for that kind of business as a multiple of that cash flow. So you could find that other people have paid 2.3 times cash flow. That's this cash flow for a similar business in the past. And so what a broker will do is they'll just say, oh, well, here's the cash flow. Here's the multiplier. I'll multiply it out. Here's what you get. And then you talk with that broker and you look at the business and you realize that this business has, accounts receivable and accounts payable and sort of some work in progress. And you say, there's a certain working capital required in this business. And you ask the broker, what exactly is included in that price that you gave us? Like how much inventory comes with it? And are we taking over current accounts like receivables and payables? And like and then you sometimes get a blank stare back because you're dealing with someone who has got no concept of these things. but they've somehow managed to convince someone that they're a qualified business broker and they can represent them. And so then they start to realize, oh my goodness, what's included? And then they say, well, the seller says, well, I'm not going to include my accounts receivable. That's my money for work I already did, right? And then all of a sudden you end up in this position where the broker and the seller are now expecting to sell the business for a certain price. And then they want to take out the receivables. They want to take out the cash. And you as a buyer are saying, wait a minute, that means I got to put money in to grease the wheels of this operation because there's a certain operating capital requirement. And the thing that's missing is that the broker doesn't understand a concept called net normal position and working capital. And so this is another area where deals just go straight in the ditch. And the seller now thinks that their business is worth a certain multiple of cash flow, plus they get to keep all of the grease out of, they're going to take the gas out of the car before they sell it to you, kind of thing. And it's just a lot more complex than what some people are led to believe when they read a couple of books on the topic or watch some YouTube videos on the topic. And without that proper setting of expectations, like I've had these conversations with sellers where we'll look at their business, we'll look at the cash flow, we'll look at their operating position, and I'll show them all these things. And they'll look at me and say, well, wait a minute. If my business can only be sold for this amount of money, but I have to leave the operating capital in it, and my equipment is worth this, and the receivables and cash are literally worth receivables and cash, it means that I'm selling the business for what's in it. And I'll say, what you've done here is you've collected a series of assets that are working together to produce the cash flow, which actually doesn't warrant any value beyond the value of the assets. Your business has no goodwill. And then their minds explode. They're like, wait a minute, I've been working for 15 years and you're telling me the business has no value beyond what's in it? I'm like, yeah, but it's probably better to sell than to liquidate. I mean, don't you want to help your employees keep their jobs? And
we're having those conversations now just because like a lot of the people coming to us are like on the journey towards being able to sell something. I totally get it.
Yeah. So here are some stats. BizBuySell.com is a big website in the US for this kind of thing. They put out a quarterly report on statistics about the activity on their marketplace. 80% of the businesses listed for sale don't sell. Okay?
80%?
80% don't sell. Okay. Here's another stat which has no bearing in any real measurable way. This is just put together from my own experience and from what is visible. And I'll talk about visibility if you want. But only about 1 in 5 businesses that change hands actually go through any kind of intermediary or end up on one of those websites. So a lot of businesses are sold like, think of a Ford dealer. If a Ford dealer wants to retire and sell their business, who's the likely buyer? It's another Ford dealer, right? And they already know those guys. So why are they calling a broker, right? And so a lot of businesses, whether it's a family transaction or it's someone you know through your industry association, like that Ford example, people are meeting each other and they're doing deals and they're going and getting a lawyer and stuff to help put the paperwork together. And they're just doing these deals without an intermediary. And so I say to people a lot that if you are strictly looking at these websites and brokers, you're only looking at a small part of the market. And when somebody does put a business up for sale on those websites that is properly priced for the cash flow, it's gone in like a week because there's so many people on there waiting for that. And when it appears, they jump on it. Because when we help sellers, we help people realize what their business is worth, and people only decide to sell it if they're really motivated. And so when we put it up there, it's priced right, it makes sense. We'll get 120 inquiries in 5 days. We'll turn it off and work through those inquiries and sort out those people. And usually there's someone in there who's going to do the deal. And then it's done. So as far as a buyer's point of view, like if you want to have any degree of leverage, there's only one point of leverage in deal making for buyers, and that's a willingness to not do a deal, right? Where you have to say, oh, that's what you want? That doesn't work for me. I can't do that. I'm going to step back. That's the only thing you can do as a buyer to try to assert your position in negotiation. And so if there's 5 other buyers, many of whom may not be as informed as you and are willing to do a dumb deal, then that's the problem, is that they'll come in and do the dumb deal and not realize until 2 years later they overpaid for the business or something else, right? So you really have to find the opportunities and create deal flow. I've interviewed on my podcast before people from the private equity world. These are professional business buyers. And they'll say how they examine 500 businesses in a year to buy one.
Yeah.
And so you've got to create a deal flow pipeline for yourself. And that usually means identifying an industry, and then it's just a sales process, right? So I always use the example of like the machine shop with 5 or 10 employees, right? So if you say, I want to buy a machine shop somewhere in the
Yeah.
Maritimes with 5 to 10 employees, great. All you need now is yellowpages.ca, and you can find all the machine shops. They're all listed together. And then you have to figure out who
Fourth
owns
Yellow
each.
Pages mentioned us by. It's great.
I know.
We need to
You-
sponsor.
Coming back.
You've got all the machine shops there listed, and then you actually have to do the work of sorting them out. Which
Yeah.
that's the local branch of like Apex Machine Shop. Well, that's not a little business; that's a bigger business, right? So I'm not going to call on them. But
Yeah.
then this one is like Joe's Machining. You're like, oh, well, that's probably one of my targets. So you have to
Yeah.
sort through the list, create your suspect list, and then create relationships with those people. And most of them are not going to be interested in selling their business.
Mhm.
But the problem in the world of buying and selling businesses is a visibility issue. It's easy for us to identify businesses because businesses want to be seen. They actually advertise. But it's hard for a business owner to look out at a crowd of people and identify who might want to buy a business.
Mhm.
That's why the business brokerage industry exists.
Mhm.
My buddy Rick bought a seafood restaurant, and he met the owner because he's a restaurant expert. He's been consulting in that field for a long time. He met the business owner as a consultant, took stock of the situation, said, here's your options, which are limited because things have gotten really bad. And he ended up becoming the owner.
Mhm.
As soon as he became the owner, within a few months, 2 other seafood restaurant owners approached him about buying their places. Because he unwittingly or unknowingly, he solved the visibility problem. He became known in that industry as the guy who just bought the restaurant. And then other people who were thinking of selling were like, oh, I should go talk to him. So
Yeah.
if you've identified the target, like the machine shop example, and you go out and you make the relationships, then all you have to do is wait.
Yeah.
For
And I think that's kind of a
something
direction
to
for us
happen.
is like using our networks currently, like not as explicitly as we're talking about it in this particular medium, but a lot of our outside network engagements were just laying the ground. It was like, this is something we're looking at because we're in a position where we're excited, but not urgent. Like we've made the decision and it's a learning journey for us as well. But there's no pressure and there's actually protection because the 3 of us have to all make the decision. And so no one person's passion will get it across the line.
Yeah.
But
it does kind of make us, well, I know for me, and I'm sure this for all of us, is it like I'm looking at everything differently now that we're considering it, which is interesting.
I'm noticing businesses I wouldn't have noticed otherwise. It's been really kind of amazing. Like I think it was one of your things about the boring business, and I just like that, and also like the businesses I just don't even think about, like the smallest widgets and services. It's like, oh yeah, that's probably a thing.
I think like earlier, even like 2 years ago, and before that, I would always look at things that were strictly my passion. It's like, how can I get involved with coffee, cycling, watches, whatever it might be? But now I'm thinking, well, why don't I just enjoy those things for what they are and go find a functioning business rather than starting this new thing, right?
Do you know who John Taffer is? He's the
Sounds familiar.
bar rescue.
Oh yes.
Okay. So I watched an article, or no, it was a video interview with him, and he was saying, the biggest problem that people get into is when they think they want to own a restaurant. He said because they like to go to restaurants, and he said it's far cheaper to own a restaurant than it is to actually be the owner. He says, here's what you do. He says you start going there 4 or 5 nights a week. You start tipping everyone $20 every time you show up. You tip the owner when you see the owner. Everyone looks forward to seeing you there. Everyone will do whatever you say. You can show up there on Valentine's Day with no reservation. They will kick someone out of the restaurant for you. Like, you will own the restaurant. You will own the bar. You will be able to enjoy everything there is about that place, and you will not have to ever make the payroll.
Yeah.
Right. And he's like, if that's the lifestyle you're going for, do that. Don't buy the thing because that'll cost you like your life. It'll suck you dry.
Yeah, and the perfect.
I did my business degree to open a restaurant, and that idea lasted 3.5 months.
Yeah, and like the idea that the romantic idea of sitting outside your own cafe and taking phone calls, and like that's literally where that dream stops.
There is a bookstore. I think it's in Virginia. That is an Airbnb that you can stay in. So downstairs is a bookstore, upstairs is the apartment, and part of renting the apartment is you get to be the bookstore owner. And there's like $20 in change in the till, and they just tell you to do your best. And they let you sell books or buy books or whatever you want to do. And every weekend there's a new owner. It's all these people working through their fantasies of being bookstore owners.
Their fantasies.
And because the bookstore itself, I don't think made any money. So someone had this bright idea of just turning it into an experience.
Yeah,
on Airbnb.
It's like an escape room for work.
Yeah.
Well, and your comment earlier about like all the things that, when we walk into any sort of business and think about what we would fix or what we should fix, and that becoming such a distraction for what you should actually be focusing on, I think is like a maturity step in the direction of being a bit more ready to look at purchasing a business. But it's funny how that's changed so drastically for me.
I definitely think there's value in knowing an industry. Because the ideal business acquisition is one in which there's a positive cash flow and the business has problems that you recognize, but you have an idea how to fix.
Yeah.
Because it's in fixing those problems and improving the cash flow that you get an appreciation in the value of the asset, right? And it becomes worth more to you, produces more of a cash flow. One of the questions that I will often ask people who find a business and they get excited about it. Someone here mentioned passion. I use a term that a guy named Ted Leverett shared with me called buyer fever. It's kind of like a condition people. It's a condition people fall under, right? And so you find the plumbing business and you think it's such a great deal. One of the questions I will always ask is, why has no other plumbing outfit bought this? What is it that another plumber might see here that we are not seeing, right? And so in an industry like plumbing, for example, you've got labor shortages, right? Everyone's talking about the lack of tradespeople. And so a plumber might look at that business and see like 8 people, and they might know that there's so much work that everyone who's in the industry is being maxed out. So why would you pay anything for that business if all you had to do was find some plumbers and put a phone number out there? You'd end up doing business, right? And that's the kind of the perception we want to pull out of people is what does someone in the industry see that you're not, and what might be different here.
And that brings up another question. I'd love to hear your opinion on taking this a little further. The option of purchasing a business or starting something brand new. I'd love to hear your thoughts around that. Maybe over
build or buy.
Well, I published a book on that at the end of 2024. Yeah,
I have it in my bag.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm a big fan of buying because you avoid the startup risk, as I said before, and I think it makes a lot of sense. At the same time, though, when we're looking at buying, one of the other questions I ask people is, what would it cost to replicate?
Yeah.
Like if we look at this business and all we're getting is a truck and 4 employees, and you could put that together, like here's a ridiculous example I said to a guy. He was looking at a plumbing and HVAC business in the States, and there were like 5 or 6 employees and a couple of vehicles, and there was a certain cash flow there, and the seller wanted like $600,000 or $700,000 for the business and felt that the cash flow justified that. And I asked this ridiculous question. I said, what if you hired 4 tradespeople and you advertise that you do plumbing for free? People have to pay for the parts. And we added up the salaries and we multiplied by 2 years. We said, if we did plumbing for free for 2 years, we could probably become the best known plumbing outfit in the market. And we would lose like $400,000 paying these guys over the next 2 years. And then maybe we could start charging for plumbing and everyone would know us. And we will have spent half doing this crazy plan than we would buying it from that guy.
Love a good story.
Now I'm not.
Switches it.
I'm not ever recommending somebody do that idea, but I'm just saying it's a crazy idea that just shows an extreme, example of what you could do. And then it really draws the question of, can that business really be worth that much? Now, when we got into the weeds on that business, what we discovered was that there were two owners, and the broker added back both of their salaries to calculate his cash flow, which is an error. It's one of the most common errors that brokers make when there's more than one owner in a business, because they're trying to get back to this seller's discretionary earnings number. And one of the things you do is add back the salary of an owner, but it's only supposed to be one owner. And a lot of brokers who are inexperienced will add back all the owners. And then this is why they thought the $700,000 price was justified, because the cash flow was inflated by one person's earnings. And when we teased this out and realized it, we're like, oh, okay, so really the cash flow is half of what they claim. The business is really only worth 300. And then it immediately fits into that example I gave, right? But of course, when those owners found out their business was worth half as much as they were told, do you think they wanted to continue selling? Yeah. What happens is business owners will meet someone, and business owners are not experts on selling businesses, right? They're experts at
or all the same.
They're experts at what they do, right? And so when they say, let's sell the business, or they get a piece of marketing material from a broker that says, I can help you sell your business for top dollar, and they say, let's check this out. And they meet a broker who either through inexperience or ignorance makes a mistake, like I described, and tells somebody their business is worth $1 million when it's really only worth $400,000, for example. That person could decide to go to market based on the fact they've been told it's $1 million business. And then if you sit down with them and show them the numbers and explain to them how the business is only worth $400,000, it can only ever sell for $400,000, they might logically be able to follow you and they might accept what you're saying. But in their mind, they are a millionaire. In their mind, they already have this money. And what I've come to learn is that people actually have to go through what is akin to a grieving process.
Yeah, totally.
So it could take that seller a year or two to really process the fact that they just lost $600,000, which never existed to begin with. But but they were led to believe they were going to get $1 million. And this is, I think, a part of this reason why we have these statistics about how many businesses don't sell. There are good businesses that could have sold really quickly. There's an example, I won't identify it specifically, even though it's been long closed, but it was a dry cleaning place. And the business owner engaged a real estate agent to sell it, which is one of the biggest mistakes that a business owner can do. Real estate agents sell buildings. Businesses are not buildings. But in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, to be a business broker, you need to have a real estate license. And so a lot of realtors out there think that they are therefore qualified to sell businesses, and they're not generally.
Yeah.
And so this business owner, called a realtor who put a sign in front of their business, and the sign being put in front of their business killed the business right away within a month, because people assumed it was closed when they saw that sign. And so I mentioned the visibility problem earlier. The businesses have to be sold in secret, because if people think that a business is for sale, they immediately think there's something wrong. Employees think they're going to lose their job. They might quit. People worry that they're not going to get a warranty, or that, if they sign on for anything that requires future delivery, like I always use a flower shop example. If I want to buy a bouquet of flowers for my girlfriend, I go in there, I hand them $20 and they give me the flowers. So I don't care if the business is for sale. I get what I paid for in the moment. But if I ask her to marry me and we have to plan a wedding for next year, I'm not going to hire that florist, because I'm worried that they might be closing, or the new owner isn't going to be as good as the current owner.
Yeah,
There's just too much risk there, right? So we've got this situation, we've got this secret that has to be kept of this business being sold. There's so much that goes into it. And if that seller isn't properly prepped, their expectations will be out of whack. And in the case of the dry cleaner, I knew that I could have sold that business. And the problem with dry cleaning is that if they've been there long enough, there's going to be environmental concerns, and people are going to want to drill holes in the ground and all this kind of thing. So I would have advised that guy, you are going to have to seller finance the real estate, because if you seller finance the real estate, no bank will become involved, and no one will start asking questions about phase 2 environmentals, et cetera, et cetera. And if people do start asking questions, they're going to have huge costs to get all these engineers out here to do the drilling and all this kind of stuff. And then if they do find something, the province will get involved and you'll have all of this headache. And what ended up happening was no one ended up wanting to do the deal. And the seller, of course, was holding out for a big check, and no one was willing to write the check, and nobody was willing to go through the process of getting the bank loan. That was an example of a business that probably could have been sold in 2 or 3 months if the person had gone to someone who knew what they were doing. It's still empty today. It's like
So
Yeah.
if you were, you said a lot of things that could probably, we could probably pull out. But if you were to have advice for people that are planning or looking or thinking about selling their business, what would you say to them?
you need to have a realistic idea of what the business is worth so that you can make a plan for your future, which does not mean waiting until you think you want to sell and then initiating the process. You need to know 10 years before you want to sell if your business is worth anything, because that's going to inform your retirement strategy. Because if your business isn't worth anything, how are you going to retire? You're going to have to create a different plan, get a financial plan, or buy some investments of some kind. Like, you're going to have a plan, right? Other people, the parts of their business might be worth something. The business might not be worth anything, but maybe they own their building and that could hold value that is enduring. They might have trouble selling it depending on where it is. But you really need to know, what are these things worth? What are my options? And that means thinking about it in advance. Very few people do that. Very, very few. I would say like 1 in 10 business owners are really people who look at their business as some kind of asset that they're, managing and taking care of.
Yeah.
Most of, like, a lot of people that own a roofing company, they consider themselves roofers, not business people.
Yeah, totally. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, so they need to have an idea of what it's worth. They also need to have an idea of what these deals look like. So I mentioned earlier about seller financing and how hard it is to find someone willing to finance the whole deal. But the flip side is that almost no deals are done without some degree of seller financing, which means that, for a lot of sellers who don't know this, I'll tell you about a restaurant in Kent County. Okay. So this was back in my broker days. I get a call from a real estate agent who's trying to sell this restaurant. He says, I've got someone who wants to buy this restaurant I'm trying to sell. We want to know where to go for financing because my buyers are having a hard time. And I'm just imagining, what's happening with these people, with this real estate guy who doesn't, the way he's taught, he doesn't have any idea how to sell a business. And I said, look, why don't you refer the parties to me and I'll help them get the deal done. And whatever commission I charge, I'll split with you for referring it to me. And of course, he freaked out. He's like, I don't know. No, it's my deal. I'm going to do it, blah, 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 blah. So eventually the restaurant closed and the building stood there empty, and someone else bought the building and opened a restaurant. Okay. But all of the value of the existing restaurant evaporated. And I found out later that several people had tried to make an offer on that restaurant and offered various sorts of payment arrangements or lease to own deals and all this kind of stuff. And the seller rejected all of those things. And the reason that the seller rejected them all is because the seller was under the understanding that they were getting an offer for the business for an amount of money and someone was going to pay them like you sell a house.
Yeah.
What the real estate agent didn't know is that it's almost impossible for anybody to get financing for a restaurant. Like, there are 3 banks in Canada that might finance 50% of the equipment. Like, that's it, right? So if the fridge, the stove, the furniture are worth $50,000, you might be able to get yourself a $20,000 or $30,000 loan. Like that's the extent of financing that's available.
10 cents on the dollars that they gave me when I had a commercial kitchen
for financing.
Yeah.
If you buy stuff new, you can sometimes get a leasing company to finance it for you, right? And so in that deal, part of preparing the seller would have been to explain to them what the deal was going to look like. Like, I would have told that restaurateur, we're going to sell this restaurant, but the likely buyer is going to be a person who's from hospitality, which means they haven't been earning a lot of money. There's not a lot of high wages in hospitality. They are going to have some kind of down payment. Maybe it's their tips. Maybe it's going to be a duffel bag full of cash, right? And they're not going to qualify for any debt unless their mom or dad is willing to co-sign with them. And so you're going to end up having to finance most of this deal, and they probably can't get a mortgage on the building. So you're going to end up just selling the restaurant and becoming their landlord. And after they've got 2 years of financial statements under their belt showing that they're capable operators, they might then be able to go to get a mortgage to buy the building from you. Or they might be able to get a line of credit to pay down part of the seller note that you hold, or something like that. But this process is going to be a multi-year process that is going to require your participation. And yeah, there's risk in that, which means you're going to need to be around keeping an eye on them. I sold a bar in Moncton, and bars are notoriously difficult to finance. And the seller held a huge note in doing that. It was like 65% of the deal. But I coached the seller. I said, look, you need to think like a banker. What are you going to need to keep an eye on this business? And he thought, okay. So he said, I want the tax returns. I want weekly and monthly reports. I want a copy of the bank statement every month. And they had this computerized bar. This was in the 90s. They had this computerized bar that like measured the dispensing of the shots of alcohol. And he said, I want the weekly report from that too. So the buyer agreed and started to operate the bar. And all of this material had to be delivered every week, every month. After about 3 months, the seller calls the buyer and says, yeah, you got someone stealing from you. Here's how I know. And it walked him through the various reports and said, here's how I know that someone's stealing from you with respect to the bar reports. And so that seller, even though they were selling and collecting money, they had to keep an eye on that business, almost like they were, territory manager or district manager or something like that.
Yeah.
And it worked for the buyer because they were able to get that oversight and support that allowed them to catch this problem before it grew into something really bad.
Yeah. And it all comes down to people. I know a few friends of mine who have bought businesses, and it's been that situation, and it was an age, retirement reason. And there's nothing they like better than being able to go back to work and hang out and keep going. But it's not the norm, but it is definitely there.
So taking this a step further, because if someone...
And after that, I want to pull us into a completely different direction.
Yes, yeah, that's fine. So taking this a step further, let's assume that what you just said is being heard on this podcast by a business owner, and they just got very overwhelmed by the mountain that now sits in front of them to figure out. What are some of those first steps that like a list of questions, first steps of like, how do I get more prepared for this? Like let's bite size it down for some folks.
Sure. So I think the very first thing is an exercise in empathy. So you have to actually think about it from the buyer's point of view. And when the buyer has to do two things. They have to figure out, what is the business worth? How am I going to pay for it? And do I really want it? I guess that's three. So the amount of cash flow that your business generates is going to determine the value. And the industry and what is in your business is going to determine the terms. So if you are a foundation company with a bunch of heavy equipment and trucks and backhoes and stuff, you're going to have more tangible assets in your business, which is going to make it easier for someone to finance with a bank loan. If you're a service business with not much in the way of assets, like your business, like you got some computers and some furniture, right? So in a business in a business like that, it's going to be harder for the buyer to get financing from a bank. So it means that the terms are more likely going to mean that you're going to have to finance more of it.
Yeah.
So the cash flow is number one. And the best thing about this is if you want to sell your business for more money, create more cash flow, which you get to enjoy before you sell the business. Right? So this is totally worth your time. Make your business more profitable. That's number one. The second question, will this cash flow continue under my stewardship? This is what the buyer's asking, because they're worried that the goodwill or the relationships or whatever is with the seller themselves and not with the business. So if I'm looking at buying a corner store and everyone in the neighborhood goes there, but every time they go there, there's just some teenage kid working behind the counter, right? The owner can change. Nobody's even going to know. Like that's an example of a business that is extreme, where the ownership doesn't really matter for the customers. The flip side of that is a business where the owner is the only salesperson and has long established relationships with the biggest customers and has a concentration problem of customers. So they've got like 4 customers that represent 50% of sales, and they're all good long-time customers with a relationship with the seller. So now buyers might agree that that business is worth, 500 grand, but they're saying, if I step into your shoes, how do I know those people are going to stick around? Right. And so then that creates a barrier for the buyer. And what they want to see is they want to see things like systems and SOPs and all that kind of stuff that you guys work on. But one of the ways that sellers need to be prepared is that they could face a deal structure that makes them bear the risk of the customer concentration. And I'll give you a quick example of that. I've done deals before, helped buyers do deals before, where a business like that would actually sell. If there's 5 big clients, there might be 5 seller notes, each for a different amount of money, all of them amortized over 5 or 6 years, but each one of those notes is tied to a specific client. And if that client disappears, then the note evaporates. So that effectively the buyer gets a discount after the fact if one of these important customers goes away. Because what, again, put yourself in the buyer's shoes. In a scenario like that, where you've got a business with very little in the way of assets, 5 important clients that make up half the revenue, and one of them disappears, like what did the buyer buy? They're only buying the relationships. The business is a cash flow. That is what someone is
Yeah.
acquiring. And so when you go through that exercise, looking at your own business, trying to see how a buyer is going to look at it, it can show you where the problems are. So that business owner might say, okay, I've got a customer concentration issue. I either need to grow the overall pie so that those top 5 people only represent a quarter of my revenue, perhaps might be a way to solve that, or I need more big clients, or I need to change the way I do business with these people. Maybe I need to have them sign contracts, or maybe I need to change the way I bill them, or something, right? So that you can create more comfort for the buyer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I love that because we're always talking about, no, it's all technology, it's process, it's business, but at the end, at the root, it's all people. And I like how validating it was here. It's like it all came back to people and emotions and empathy and communications, and that's kind of what we feel and find in ours. I do, and we can come back to this because I love this topic, but I want to be selfish and shift us
Sure.
just a little bit. Because the other area that you have a lot of history in, and I'd love for you to poke some reality holes, is Colby and I are loving doing this podcast. We're loving the conversations. We're loving the fact that every week we have these 1 to 2 hour conversations on topics we care about with people who know stuff. But we're also geeky about the business side of it. Not that we're planning on this becoming a revenue stream or a business unto its own. But I'm wondering, like, my understanding is you've been doing this content marketing YouTube channel for a long time, 10 plus years or thereabouts. And you've written books, which is something that's been a personal passion of mine as well, but I've never published. Is that just marketing? Is there a business to that? Like, any thoughts on that as a, because you put a lot of time into these things, and I'm just like, is that pure marketing for your world?
So it's a great thing I love to talk about. I actually made a video on my YouTube channel called "Why Do M&A Coaches Make Videos?" And that video explains my marketing funnel and the way that I run my business. But there's 2 kinds of content creators. There's content creators that are using the generosity of a platform like YouTube to market themselves, and that would be me. And then there are creators whose product is the content. And so when my children watch people playing video games on YouTube or Twitch, they're watching people who have to create an audience in the millions, because every time an ad plays, they're earning a fraction of a penny off of that view, right? And so it's only in the last 3 years that I monetized my YouTube channel. I thought it would be annoying for people that I want to do business with to have to see advertisements if they watch my videos. But what I came to realize is that if I wasn't monetizing my channel, then Google wasn't making any money off of me either. Google owns YouTube. And if they can't make any money on you, the algorithm has no reason to share your content. So I monetized my channel, and my growth rate in subscribers doubled. So just like that, because now YouTube can make money off my content. Now,
so you monetize like using the monetization features within YouTube, not by like you personally getting sponsors for your content.
I have one sponsor for my content. And really, I get bombarded by people who want to do some kind of sponsorship or joint venture with my channel, but it's all super scammy stuff that about crypto coins and all this sort of thing that I would never want to put in front of my viewers.
No.
And so I do have a sponsor who's from the world of insurance and financial planning and stuff, and I know him and I know what he's doing, and I know it's good, and I have clients of mine who've used his services that have reported back that he's a solid guy. So I do that, but really the value for me in creating all this content is that it brings us clients that we do consulting work for. So it is an advertising marketing channel, and would there be an opportunity for you guys to make money from your podcast? I think that the surest way to make money would just be to create something that your listeners could buy from you. So for me, over the years, I kept getting the same questions from people all the time. That eventually led to me creating some online courses. And then I've got a group coaching program for people that want to buy a business. So there's 20 to 30 people in that group at any given time. We meet 3 times a month. People pay a quarterly membership fee. It's been going since 2018. And so people who join get access to all of the recorded recordings going back to 2018. And so you can literally listen to people talk about their conversations with bankers, with brokers, with business owners. Like, you guys should totally join that if you're serious about this buying journey. And so that's another example of, and because I do it as a group, it means that people can make a very modest individual investment, and it's a way for me to leverage my time because I'm serving everyone all at once, right? But the biggest ticket items that we do at my firm are the consulting items. And so that's like one-on-one, and I've got a couple of analysts on the team that help me with that work. And so that's the sort of the bottom of the funnel, if you want to envision, sort of a marketing funnel kind of thing.
Yeah. So that's,
really good.
Selfishly, again, I would love to understand, because you write books on your subject matter, and it's another driver for audience trust building, consulting at the bottom of the funnel. But is there any industry left to be an author, just on its own legs? Like, do people make money off writing anymore?
I don't know if anyone outside of Stephen King ever did. Like, or
to be honest, I always wanted to be an author, and then the more I've learned about it, it's like, that is just, it's easier to be a restaurateur.
Well, you mentioned what is it? E-Myth Revisited, and if you read the book, it tells you why you need to do all this stuff, but it's very short on the how. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
It's because they have E-Myth Consulting and E-Myth Coaching and E-Myth this and that and all these other things that they're ready to sell you, right? And so that book is an entry into their whole world of marketing services and everything, right? And
oh, go ahead, finish your thought.
Well, but so I can tell you that my books are all evergreen content, which means that the books I wrote 10 years ago are just as valid then as they are now. I do update them from time to time. I go in, I change some of the stuff, but I don't make a splash out of it being a second edition. I just go into Amazon and replace the file. And so, people get the newer content. I sell books every week, but I've never earned more than $300 in a month off of royalties, right? But the whole thing is like, what really does it for me is when I get these emails from people who say, I read franchise warnings, and then I went and looked at the franchise agreement I was about to sign. And I realized all the different things that I was exposing myself to that I didn't realize before. Yeah. And I decided it wasn't for me. And thank you. Or someone else who says, I read this other book and I realized I was about to make a mistake. My most popular book is called 21 Stupid Things People Do When Trying to Buy a Business. And it's literally just the top things that I've seen people do over and over again. And I've gotten so much feedback from that book of people who had actually made offers on businesses. And then they got the book and they were like, oh my God, I made this mistake.
I'm number 17.
Well, one of the analysts on my team all have small business ownership experience. And my latest hire, his name is Alberto. He only read the book after I hired him because reading the books is part of the onboarding work that we do. And he was like, oh my God. He was like, I checked like 9 of the boxes. I did 9 dumb, stupid things. And I was like, I'm so sorry that you didn't find it before. But this is what happens.
But
And
Yeah.
there also has to be a street credibility of like being an author. It obviously feeds into the whole thing.
It does. But you could say, for example, you could say, hey, we help people better organize their business, and a bunch of other people have already written books about that. Right. And so you can treat this as one of two ways. You can either say, but Levi and Colby have not written a book about this, and Levi and Colby's book will be different because we're writing it and we're going to inject some little twist into it that's going to make it different. So in my space, there's plenty of other people that have written other content. There's plenty of other content creators, but there's only one David C. Barnett, right? And so part of it is that people, consume my content. They like how I sound. They find that I can articulate things well, that I'm easy to learn from. And so then it's not about just information as a commodity. It's I want David's help when I do this. And you create that kind of relationship through things like creating this podcast, where people today will start listening to you, and they'll listen to you for 2 years, and then all of a sudden they'll be in a position where they could use your help, and then there won't be a question of who they want to go to. They're going to go to you guys because they already know you from all these conversations that you're creating.
And it makes a lot of sense. Like, some of my interest in this topic is less about the business and the nonfiction. It's like, Colby, we talk often because you come back from music, and the idea that musicians are not properly paid for art, I think, is even worse in written art. like the fact that right now it's harder to make money writing novels than it is to be a musician professionally is just, that's dangerous. Anyway, it's a whole aside, except for the business. But
sorry, I didn't get to the other thing. I said if there's a book written about it, you could either make your own book, which is specific to you. The other option is you can throw your hat in with that other book. So have you heard of Profit First? Mike Michalowicz? So it's a basically it's a money management system for small businesses that is based on the whole pay yourself first concept. And so Mike Michalowicz,
we talk about that often.
well, Mike wrote this great book, and it's really clear and easy to understand. And then what he did is he created a licensing program. So there are Profit First certified coaches. So my friend Rocky is one of these people. So he's like, why would I write my own book when I can just use this book? I can piggyback off of this author who's done all this work already. And he'll go to conferences and things. And now because he's licensed, he can buy these books by the box full at a discounted price. And so he just leverages all the work that Mike Michalowicz has done for that brand and the title of the book to build his own business with. And an author doesn't necessarily have to have a licensing program for you to find a book and say, hey, I want to use this as my key teaching tool. And you just go to them and say, hey, we want to promote our service using your book. Can I get a rate on buying 500 copies or something?
We've actually looked at that. It's just come down to time and dollars because we're pretty busy. But the like Pat Lencioni's Table Group, all his books have certifications you can take in the coaching. Built to Sell does, eMyth does. Like, there's just all these things that we already talk about in all of our projects anyway. It would just be an easier entry point. But they're all, $3,000 to $5,000 and takes time. And I'm doing it now, so I shouldn't say that loud.
Well, but you're right, and it's the same kind of decision that anyone faces when they're thinking about this kind of stuff. Anyone can open a hamburger joint, or you can buy a franchise. And then when you look at a franchise, of course, everyone knows McDonald's and Burger King, but there's other burger joints around that are less known. Is there value in having one of those? Like, these are the kind of decisions people have to go through when they're thinking about their business. I would say that if you guys are already successfully executing with clients and you're able to sell yourselves and demonstrate a track record, and maybe, I don't know, what do you do with past clients? You have some kind of like white papers or case studies that you put together to
case studies.
Yeah, case studies. Okay. So you are building the accoutrement, building this successful thing on your own without necessarily leaning on someone else's stuff. I mean, we're
leaning on all kinds of people's stuff. We're just not attributing.
Okay, fair.
Kinda.
Yeah. Well, I can never remember who I got it from, but I feel like everything we say every time is from someone.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's an original thought somewhere, but
maybe.
I feel like I've scratched not all my itches, but the itches I wanted to make sure to get done. Was there anything you wanted to talk about, David, that we didn't cover today?
Well, I was brainstorming about how you guys can make some money with your podcast because I was thinking, because you had asked that question the other day when we did
Yeah.
a pre-call. And I was thinking about, a lot of your first conversations that you had on this podcast. And I know it's not that old. We're all about the peer group thing.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, there are specific categories or types of businesses that fall outside of all these peer group programs
Mm.
that the people have a thirst for this kind of thing. Like
Yeah.
I think that there could be an opportunity for you guys to do something like that. I was at a conference I was at two conferences in March. I was at one in Cancun and I was at one in Cincinnati. And in both cases, it really brought home to me sort of the value of these real life experiences, how much value comes between sessions when you're chit chatting
Mm.
with someone you just met and talking about similar experiences and stuff. And it is extremely frustrating for me to know that there are 2 million people in the maritime provinces, and we really have no consistent, regular series of business events that are interesting for people to go to. In the fall, Startup Canada Tour came to Moncton, and I know that the Regional Service Commission, was involved in having them come and stuff, and I thought that was really cool. And then I was like, and so what's happening next year? And nothing. Like they're not coming back next year. It was just a one-time thing.
And even then, so many people are so anti-startup. It's the word startup, so they wouldn't have identified and gone or participated.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and that thing drew people there were people here from the island, from Nova Scotia, from all
Yeah.
over New Brunswick. And I think that there's a real need and a hunger for
Yeah.
face-to-face stuff. And I think there's
Yeah.
some kind of thing that can be put together, and it doesn't need to be something that is incredibly difficult to start. There's a
Mm.
conference I attend every fall, which is all about financial and small business content marketing. And it's like a global conference. It's usually held somewhere in the States. But when they started, like 13 or 14 years ago, it was literally 30 people gathering in Chicago. And these things can start small, and
Mm-hmm.
you can build it up over time. Uh, and I think there's an appetite for that, especially in this region, because there's just nothing like that going on where people can get together.
No, and when we say we want to monetize or create revenue, it's just so that we can do more of it because we're enjoying it and people find value, and it's just like, well, we can't just grow it without being responsible. So, yeah,
But if
we've
the
talked about it.
if the year-long mission of the podcast is to sell tickets to an event or to create groups of peers or
Yeah.
whatever, then you can actually tie some kind of performance metric to the content
Yeah.
creation.
I like
Yeah. And you bring people to an e-newsletter. Did you always do that, or was that kind of a eventual? Because that's something we don't do. That any long format text we're not doing, and
Yeah,
yeah, I don't know why
so
we don't do it. We just haven't thought about it.
you can't, it's unwise to, I don't know, build your business on rented land or something like that. I don't know what the quote is, but
Well,
there's
yeah,
all
we
kinds of
call it a
quotes like that.
first degree data strategy is kind of the way we formally talk about it. But yeah,
Yeah. So I've got my YouTube audience, my LinkedIn audience, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all these places, but I don't own
mm,
those algos. I don't own those platforms.
yeah,
And so you have to have a strategy to get people into your own world.
mm-hmm,
I cringe every time I drive by a business that has like us on Facebook, right? Why? So you can get 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 followers that you can then pay to talk to. That's how Facebook makes their money, right? And so you get them onto
yeah,
email. And yes, my email service provider charges me to send out emails, but once I have
mm,
someone's email address and they've opted in because they want to hear from me, well, then I can communicate with those people and I can
mm-hmm,
send something out. I email every day, and it blows me away when I look at the statistics because I'll get an email from someone who says I want help to buy this business, and I'll put their email address into my email platform, and I'll find out they've been subscribed for 3 years. They've opened 300 emails in that time, um, and um, and
yeah,
finally they needed me, and they reached out.
the right
And
timing.
in I don't know if it was the 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss or if it was just a podcast with him, but he was saying like doubling down on email, like because it doesn't change as much as the other ways of communicating. And that's still proving to be true. Like, yes, some rules can change, but like at the end of the day, it's kind of, something that you can have more control over.
Well, yes, you have to have the right strategy though with email. Like people will get on the Canadian Tire email list and they'll think that this is an example of how they should run their business.
Right.
And Canadian Tire sends an email that looks like their flyer, right? Here are our
Hmm.
specials and stuff. And that's what you expect from them because they're a merchant of general merchandise. But if you send that kind of email, like if Ironhouse Pro sent that kind of email every day to people, just pitching your service, people would unsubscribe, right? And
And
so
we would unsubscribe ourselves.
Yeah.
and so you have to create value. You got to send something that
Yeah.
people want to read, that is going to show them that
Yeah.
you're worth subscribing to, and they want to look forward to it. And I get people all the time that reply to my emails and say, "Yours is the only spam I look forward to reading." And I'm like, "Oh, I feel so good about that." But I tell stories and stuff, and I'll say, "Here's something that happened to a client," or "Here's an example of this," or an example like, and so people learn from it. And some people don't want to read it that day; they just delete it. Right? It doesn't matter. It's up to them how they want to treat it. And the
Hmm.
people that aren't interested legitimately, they unsubscribe. So like,
Yeah.
some people get twisted about unsubscribes, but I'm like, well, they didn't want to be my customer. They should
Yeah.
go away. Like they should go find whatever it is they're looking for.
Yeah.
And it's not like we don't have the tools or the awareness of the tools. Like it's probably going to be added. Like even just like because we don't do one, but we help other companies adopt and start these things. It's like, oh, let's just have our own living lab. That's actually how this is becoming. It's our little living lab for like marketing tech that we just don't have another excuse for. It's like, oh, well, let's play with it on this new realm and try these different platforms and tools, and testing AI tools for this is easier than our larger consulting, which like has business that we depend on it. We can play with this, which has been fun.
David, did you have any like questions for us in particular? Anything that you're curious about?
Well, I don't know if I've heard on your podcast specifically who your ideal client avatar was. Like, who are you trying to reach through this podcast? Who should be calling Ironhouse Pro today?
So I'll answer. I think those aren't the same person, for rightly or wrongly. When I do the podcast, I'm not necessarily speaking to the customer, but at some point they likely will be. Our target avatar, we have a few. We have some public sector and private sector versions. But at the end of the day, we're looking for people we can help make their business stronger. The most common problem we solve is helping make the organization more independent of individuals so that they can choose to do what they want to do and nothing depends on them. So a lot of structure and team. If I was to define an avatar that was the most central, it's the traditional, older, been in business long time, business that's trying to become more modern, probably because of a succession or some upcoming transition. That's the one where we've had the most success and we go into. So they're long-term, they're profitable, they're stable, they've been in business for a long time, but they've missed a few steps. And now they want to like skip ahead, or the new generation of employees wants to use tech that it's just not ready to do. And so it's complicated, and it's not like a new CRM. It's like, it's like starting 6 steps before a CRM or an ERP or inventory management. And it's a lot of like in their kitchen, sitting with their teams, kind of figuring out what's the roadmap to get there. That's what fires us up.
Yeah.
That's, and then here, I don't know. I'm just talking to myself in this podcast right now and hope the right people listen, but
Yeah. And I might add that, I think that, the self-awareness aspect of like knowing that, you mentioned the amount of business owners that don't know that they need to start this 10-year journey of getting prepared. And I think there's a level of kind of self-awareness that is suggested or required to, understand that this is an investment. It's a want, not a need. We're kind of in that category still, and we're trying to tip that scale because we feel like we're in need.
I have a friend online who helps people prepare for exits more immediately than what you guys are doing. And he likens it to trying to sell medicine to people who don't know they're sick.
Yeah.
yeah, totally.
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's
and
preventative.
and
It's preventative.
It's like teaching them what halitosis is, so they'll buy the the breath freshener. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
Uh,
so, I definitely think that you know content or media, it's getting into the heads of those people and what would be their frustration and what would they type into Google.
yeah.
How do
Yeah.
I, right?
Well, yeah, because and we're actually going through that now. Like we struggle with that, and we talk to people. We're doing a big SEO audit, new website stuff. But like for us, when we try, people ask us. Like you said the word empathy earlier, and it resonated because like I did a first podcast before we merged companies called Entrepreneurial Stories, and I started that not because I wanted to do a podcast, but because I had 4 or 5 team members who didn't get the position of the business owner we were working with. Like the average person, in my experience, puts business owners on a pedestal. They're all rich, they're all successful, they know what's going on. And I know from my relationships and realities that they're like very rare do they know exactly what's going on. And and there's shame and there's guilt and there's all kind of pride and ego. And there's like, I can run a $10 million company, but I can't figure out Google Calendar. And so we were in these, and I have these 20, 30, 35-year-old team members who like when they were talking to the clients we were working with, who were like frustrated that my team finds super easy. It's like, we need to gut check. Like that's when they have to read E-Myth. That's when they have to read Built to Sell. And then I started bringing in these business owners to do a podcast, and it was a group session. So we would record it like we're doing now, but they all had to be in the room. And it was like, they were able to filter questions in, like it was a webinar. So it was like a live screening. And the goal was for you to build empathy and care, to turn on the give a shit button. Because for me, this isn't a like, let's help them maximize their sale. Like for some of these business owners, like this is a real personal family issue. Like I need to get out of my own way. And I see it on the peer group side. That's why it comes up so often. But I can't say this is a social enterprise to most crowds, but it really is solving a big challenge.
So how many of those shows did you do?
I did 16 episodes of that one.
Okay. So are you familiar with Notebook LM, the Google AI?
Familiar, but never used.
Okay. So what you could do, for instance, is you could upload all 16 of those episodes as sources into Notebook LM. And then you could even upload some other articles and things that discuss some of these issues that business owners have. And then you could ask Notebook to generate a list of issues, topics, or questions that entrepreneurs like these ones may ask when they're trying to find solutions to their problems. And then Notebook will probably come up with a list of either topics or questions. And then you could create content like one thing addressing one question. And that could even those could become sections of a book too. So it's like you could use the actual frustrations from those recordings that are expressed as people share their story to actually create this content map for you to fill out.
I think about it as identifying the symptoms, because nobody ever articulates the whole thing. It's the pain points to see along the way that we then is like, oh, that's an underlying cause.
That's a really good idea. And like when we start to feel like, when it comes back to the author thing, like I've quietly only, this is probably the first time I'm saying it out loud, but I've been interested in the whole author thing for a long time. Never did anything with it, but mainly because I don't feel like I'm not, I feel like I'm saying things that other people have said, and it's just, that type of thing. But your idea there that you just expressed, like that does put our own voice and that could be very interesting. It could be like, I'm a big Tim Ferriss fan, but like when he put out Tools of Titans, these short little things where you could just skip to anywhere, that might be something fun that we could tackle.
Yeah. Stories, like, and that's why I liked talking to you, David, is because everything becomes a story, and it's no longer instruction. It's storytelling. It's people.
Yeah.
And we're wired for that, right? Like our ancestors and stuff. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
But surprisingly few people do it. When they give instruction, like it's hard to do well.
I think we're probably coming to a nice, we're coming on to 2 hours, and
you sense the hook coming. No.
but I got probably too much value out of this. I took 2 pages of notes, and I'm going to rewatch this a couple times. David, where can people find you?
Yeah. So if you're just interested in learning about buying, selling, financing, or managing small businesses, just look up David Barnett Small Business anywhere, and you'll find me on YouTube. DavidCBarnett.com is my blog site, and there's kind of like the central nervous system of everything, and all the places I appear end up there on blog posts and stuff, and you can learn about the books and everything. But yeah, come on over to YouTube if you want to watch videos, or all the audios to the videos are on the different podcast apps. So like I said, just David Barnett Small Business, you'll find me. And hey, Maritimers, Atlantic Canadians, join with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to get a connection request from you if we're not already connected.
And we'll be sure to put those links in the...
so many show notes. So many show notes.
Yeah.
Starting with the yellow pages.
Yes. Yes. It's funny, but I got the book this spring, and I guess it was last spring in Moncton. The book comes out in May, and I always flip through it still, and I look for the vestiges of the ads I worked on, and some of them are still there, like big half-page ads from back in the day are now shrunk down and with no color, but they still kind of look like the ads that I worked on, and they're slowly shriveling away. It's definitely becoming less important, but I think that there's still some businesses that are probably successful with it based on maybe a certain demographic they're going after or something.
Yeah.
But
I tease, but it's definitely there. Yeah. All right. Well, let's call this to an end.
Yes, thank you so much, David. And I really appreciate the conversation.
It's not the last conversation for sure.
No.
Awesome. We'll see you guys later.
Cool.
This episode of Built to Last is brought to you by Iron House Pro, your behind-the-scenes partner in building organizations designed to thrive. We specialize in solving the big challenges, the small annoyances, and everything in between. So while you're out there dreaming big, we're here making sure your systems, processes, and people are ready for tomorrow. Iron House Pro, driven to create lasting organizations. Learn more at ironhousepro.com.